Hello, I'm Celine and welcome back to my channel. It's Jane Austen July, the month in which people either read Jane Austen, read about Jane Austen, or read books based on books by Jane Austen. I thought it would be fun to make a little video in which I rank all of Jane Austen's novels, which I have in this cute little box set here with Jane's face on it. So yeah, let's get started. I should mention that this ranking is purely based on my own enjoyment. It has nothing to do with literary quality or anything objective. It is just how I feel. I should also disclose that even though I have read all 6 of these books, I read them, or at least most of them, a very long time ago. I read Emma in 2010, which was one of the first classics I actually read just by myself for fun, so not for school or anything like that. And since then I've sort of read them all, but most of them I have read sort of between 2010 and 2019. So it has actually been a couple of years since I've revisited Jane Austen. And so these are just my thoughts of how I fondly look back at them, and it has less to do with actually having a really vivid reaction or response to it as I am now. To be fair, I would absolutely love to reread most of these, and maybe this is the month in which I do that. We'll see. My least favourite Jane Austen. We're going to go from my least favourite to my most favourite. Sadly, my least favourite is Sense and Sensibility. And this was luckily not the first Jane Austen I read, so I'm glad for that. But there was just something about Sense and Sensibility that didn't really connect with me, and particularly the ending kind of left a bitter taste in my mouth. I did not like who one of the main characters ends up with. So I didn't love this. Even though this has got all of the hallmarks of a great Jane Austen novel, it's got the fantastic writing style, which I honestly think is present in all of her books. It's got great characterization, and there were things about this that I enjoyed. I enjoyed having the sort of sister relationship at the heart of this book. But at the same time, this was not my favourite. Going up in the list is Persuasion. And this was one where a lot of people told me that Persuasion is their absolute favourite, that is the most mature of Jane Austen's works. And that might be true. I'm not sure how you would necessarily determine how mature someone's work is. But I also at the same time felt there was a little bit of the joy and sort of the freshness that her novels usually have for me that was less present in Persuasion. So to me it almost felt like when people said this is a more mature kind of work, what they meant was this is a slightly depressing kind of work, which I don't think is what they meant, but it is kind of how I read Persuasion. It was just a slightly less joyful experience for me, although it wasn't nearly as frustrating as Sensibility was for me. I didn't really feel super connected to the main character, and I don't know, this one just sort of passed me by, and I read it and I was like, oh yeah, that was good, but nothing about the plot of Persuasion has stuck around in my mind, even though I have read some of the other ones longer ago, but they're more vivid in my memory. So yeah, Persuasion. I really want to reread it because I'm a bit like, what was this even about? I can only sort of vaguely recall my feelings about it rather than actual plot points. So this is definitely one that I would love to reread just to see how I feel about it now. Speaking of books that I kind of forget somehow, this is Northanger Abbey. I've read this one twice, and this is the only one of Jane Austen's novels that I've read twice. So I read it both in 2013 and in 2019. Yet, again, I somehow forgot most of the plot, even though I've read it twice in 2019, although, admittedly, is already 4 years ago. It's still not that long ago. But I do really enjoy this one. This is a really fun one. I really enjoy how Jane Austen sort of satirizes the Gothic novel and how her main character, is constantly imagining herself to be a Gothic heroine and how that plays out. I actually really enjoyed. So this is sort of the point in the ranking where I'm like, I really love these books, but of the ones that I really loved, Northanger Abbey is somehow the most forgettable. Next up is, don't kill me, it's Pride and Prejudice. So I read Pride and Prejudice last out of all of Jane Austen's books because there were so many expectations. So many people had told me this is their absolutely favorite novel of all time. And I already sort of knew the story because I'd seen some adaptations, and I particularly really love Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, which is nothing really like this book, let's be honest. But I liked it. Obviously I loved it. Let's be honest. I did love it, but it didn't blow me away in the way that I had expected it to. I think partially because I'd already just really read all of Jane Austen's work. So I wasn't coming into this fresh. I was coming into this with the knowledge of the 5 other books. And I think this is definitely a fantastic book. I love how it fits together. I love the characters. Honestly, the Bennets are just an absolute delight to me. And I love Elizabeth. She's such a great main character. But at the same time, as we will see in a moment, there were other characters of Jane Austen's that I loved more. So sadly, this one ends up on number 3, even though this is a great book. It's wonderful. Highly recommend, but is not my personal favorite. Then on number 2, it is Mansfield Park. Now, I know that this is not the most beloved of Jane Austen's books. I know that people absolutely detest both the main character and the love interest, but I love Fanny. I think she's great. I know that, she's seen as this sort of whimpering, constantly blushing type of heroine, but I just found her so sensitive and interesting because at the same time she's someone who feels everything really deeply, but at the same time she's also someone who is really principled and really cares a lot about certain things. And this one is also one of Jane Austen's longest works, but I needed to know what was going to happen to Fanny. I needed to know where this was all going. And I just loved spending time with her, and I loved spending time in this universe. Even though, some parts of the plot are really frustrating, and the way Fanny is treated can be extremely frustrating. But still, I couldn't look away. That's how I felt while reading Mansfield Park, and therefore it ends up being one of my favorites. Then at number 1 is, of course, Emma. And Emma was the first book that I read by Jane Austen, and somehow has ended up being my favorite, even though when I first read it, I kind of struggled with the language. So English is not my first language, and when I was reading this, I found the rhythm of Jane Austen's prose difficult. And so especially the first 100 pages or so were a struggle. However, I just love Emma as a character. I love how she and her love interest, just in case people are worried about spoilers, how they complement each other, how they hold each other accountable, how they're kind of equals in a way that you don't necessarily expect in fiction from this period. I just find her hilarious, and she is very frustrating, but at the same time I just love watching her grow, and I think that's what really pushed Emma up the list for me, that I really adore how she changes in the novel and how she learns from her mistakes. And mistakes, she makes, but I don't know, there's something really wonderful about Emma. And this is a story, even though, I've read it in 2010, it really stayed with me, and the characters have really stayed with me in the time since then. And also the movie adaptation, the recent one, is really lovely, which I also highly recommend. So yes, this is my ranking of Jane Austen's novels. I would love to hear what your favorite is, and what is your least favorite. I also think that says a lot about a person, like which one is along the top and which one is along the bottom. So let me know, and I'll see you next time.